This episode of Resilience and Relationships is sponsored by the Set Me Free Project. Hello, and welcome to Resilience and Relationships. I am Stephanie Olson. So glad to be back. I have been gone for a while, so I'm really excited to be back, and I'm here with
Dylan Yeomans, Director of
yes,
Communications.
yes. By the way, who happens to be my mom's favorite on this podcast?
I'm
Not
mother approved.
not me, but my mom loves you, Dylan. She actually said, I just have to share this. She actually said, my gosh, Dylan brings so much energy and excitement. I'm so excited. You and Rebecca are good too, but Dylan is everything. So yeah, there we go. But Jan, I am so excited to get to know you. We've got a wonderful guest here on today's episode. So Jan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good morning. It's morning where I'm at. My name is Dr. Jan Canty. I'm a psychologist. I'm also a homicide survivor, which is an odd term because you can't survive homicide, but that's what we're known as, people who cope with or dealt with the aftermath of homicide. And that set my career in a totally different trajectory, which is lending itself to the topic we'll be getting into today.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that really kind of leads us to dive right in, Dylan.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So Jan, I always kind of love on the show to kind of put in a little bit of homework, so to say, and try to form up some good questions for you. So I'm curious, and this kind of comes from a place of hopefully beginning so we can kind of evolve on it. But I'm a little curious on what does freedom, so to speak, come to mean to you after experiencing what you have experienced with profound loss and trauma? I'm kind of curious what that now means to somebody of a survivor stance like yourself.
Well, speaking for myself, I don't want to speak for everybody, but from myself, I would say it was a loss of that. Prior to the homicide, I felt pretty, footloose and fancy free and optimistic, and I could conquer my goals, and bad things didn't happen to people who spent their life in a library, which is what I did till I was 30. And then lo and behold, the homicide happened. And since then, I think it really grounded me and it let me know you can't take freedom for granted. It's not for everybody and it's never a given. That doesn't say I don't have moments where I feel that way, but I think on the whole, it really tends to open your eyes and make you realize that freedom is not guaranteed. Freedom from worry,
Yeah.
freedom from harm, that kind of thing.
Are you open to sharing a little bit about your story and what happened and what brought you to the place where you are a homicide survivor?
Well, it's a multi-layered story, but I'll just give you the quick, brief cliff notes to it. In 1985, I was in my 11th year of marriage to another psychologist. I was in my postdoctoral fellowship year, so I didn't have my credential. I was like 2 weeks away. And we've been married 11 years. He was 18 years my senior. And he just failed to come home one night. Now, this is before the internet, before grief therapy, before anything really, to have any help. And he failed to come home. And I called his answering service. The police didn't want to talk about it because he hadn't been gone 24 hours. I also remember it was a very bad storm that night. For July, it was unusual. We had a lot of hail and winds. So I attributed his lateness to that, maybe a car wreck. But at any rate, that sense of suspension and not knowing lasted 10 days. And on the 10th day, I got a phone call from Detective Marlis Landeros from the Detroit Homicide Division and asked if she could, if I would be willing to come by. Well, I guess it wasn't a request, but come by the Detroit Homicide Division and we want to speak with you. So at that point, I knew what they were going to be telling me. And so I went down there and basically it wasn't exactly what I expected, though. When I got there, they said to me, we don't have his body yet, but we have every reason to believe he's been murdered, given the evidence we do have, and we'll be in touch. The whole time I was there took 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And so I went home and I waited, and another few days passed by, And Detective Landeros said, I'm going to come by and pick you up, and I'm going to take you back to Detroit headquarters. And she did. And when I got in there, I met with Inspector Gil Hill, who, by the way, was simultaneously cast as Detective Todd in the Eddie Murphy movie that was going on at the time, Beverly Hills Cop. So I knew what he looked like. And
So
he
the
was no
real
different.
detective was cast as
Detective Todd.
Huh.
Yeah. Or maybe it was Inspector Todd, but yeah, the film crew had come by Detroit Police Headquarters just to get some interior shots for the movie, but they liked him so well that they offered him the part and he took it.
Interesting.
And I mention this because he's no different in person. That's just how he is. Very short on words, has a scowl. Looks weathered and worn and weary. And he had very few words. He just brought me in and he said, we have reason now to know that he has been murdered, and you ought to check your finances. And we just have a few questions of, like, have you ever been followed, or since you've been followed? He asked me a few questions like that. And then he said, and Detective Landeros is going to take you to the morgue. So she took me to the morgue. And since he'd been gone and buried for 10 days, it was pretty awful what I saw. Now, today they wouldn't do that because the DNA has come so far since 1985. They wouldn't need to have in fact, I had a detective tell me that they were surprised they did it at all because he didn't look like himself, after 10 days. But at any rate, it was a very highly publicized murder in Detroit, given the fact that he was a psychologist and it was such a brutal murder. And that became the 1-2 punch because they did not let up. They interrupted his funeral. I left in the middle of it. They cased my house. They published a map to my house from the crime scene on the front page of the Detroit News, which caused other people to start driving by and stealing things from outside my house. We homicide survivors call those death tourists, and many of them love true crime. So many of them were posing in front of my house and just being a nuisance. And I kept thinking, well, it'll die down. And I did have to go to the I was subpoenaed to go to the preliminary hearing. Otherwise, I would not have gone. That was about in December. He had been murdered in July. This is now December. And that was the first time I saw the defendants in court. And John Carl Fry and Dawn Marie Spence were charged with the homicide, and they were held over for trial. But I was not subpoenaed to go to the trial, so I didn't attend. And the reason I did not is because I was tired of the media, and I thought, what difference is it going to make to my life? Even if they're convicted and given the maximum sentence, I'm still going to be a widow. I still got to sell the house. I still got the media breathing down my neck. I still got all these health issues now to contend with. So why do it? I'm not in the majority of people who do that. Most homicide survivors will go to the trial. I want to add that. But for me, I didn't want anything to do with it. In fact, I left town for that duration. So that was in December, and I expected the media would let down, but it didn't. And I did not know until 18 months later that the reason it didn't is because one of the reporters wanted to write a book. So any little detail, he released it. Like John Carl Fry escaped at one point. So that was on the front page. And it was like a year update was on the page. And it just went on. And I got to the point where people knew my face, in public, and they expected a report from me. If I was in the grocery store, I think the more you're in the news, people feel entitled to that information, even though it's none of their business. And I never asked to be a celebrity. So that brought me to my difficult decision, very difficult decision of just leaving Detroit altogether. I had just started my practice. I had just bought a house, and I got this isn't going to die down. So I packed up and moved. And this is back in the days when it was easier to reinvent your life because the internet was not in existence yet. So I did. I moved west, and I changed careers. I went from being a clinical psychologist with a practice to teaching, and I found out I actually loved it. And I stayed teaching for the next 20 to 25 years, a graduate school. I really, really enjoyed it. But in that interim, I did not speak of the homicide for 30 years. I didn't tell a soul. Nobody knew. And that I thought I got to get myself together first before I'm willing to share it with anybody. And what I fell back on, and because as I said, I lived in a very small town way off the beaten track, There was no help available. The internet wasn't there. My family lived out of state, so they weren't around. So I fell back on a concept that has sustained me, and it's called the biopsychosocial model, in which you have to address all three dimensions if you want lasting change. So what I decided to do for the social part of it was I traveled into third world countries and worked doing a variety of projects, and in the process met people with real trauma. I mean, people that the stories I could tell you about the people I met and what they had to deal with. People without political rights and clean water and clean roads, and it was awful. So when I came home from those different parts of the world, it put a new perspective on it. It was like, I don't have it so bad. I had the police, I had my education, I had a roof over my head, I had clean water. I would get through this. I had those resources. The second part of it was the physical part of it. And so I joined a gym, and I joined a women's group at the gym for 6:30 in the morning, 4 days a week. And we did that for years. And we ended up doing triathlons together. And I found that put a different spin on it too, because I felt stronger. I felt connected a little bit more than I had in the past. And I don't have time to get into it here today, but it actually ended up saving my life because I fell and broke my arm, and they detected cancer early because of my climbing that hill and falling and breaking my arm. So that was a offshoot I hadn't expected, a positive thing. But then the one missing piece was still psychological. And someone suggested to me to do a podcast. And I'm like, I don't know a thing about podcasts. But I was a guest on a podcast, and I got a lot of encouragement from Javier Laveda, who had the Pretend podcast, to try it. And I did. I called it Domino Effect of Murder. I had guests on who were other homicide survivors from all over the world. And it was very beneficial to me personally because I'd felt like I'd met my tribe. These are the people that could finish my sentence for me, that understood what I'd been through. And unfortunately, after 6 years, my hearing started to decline. I'd had a bad ear infection when I was in India, and they said in time it would take my hearing enough away that I couldn't distinguish accents and sound effects. So I had to give it up. But I've done other things to be an advocate. So it was a long journey, over 40 years now, 35, 40 years. And it's only been in the last 5 years I could even talk about.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, I'm going to let Dylan ask some questions, I promise. But you had another layer to this homicide with finding out more about your husband and kind of a double life. Is that right? So I can't imagine that would add to the trauma that you experience.
It did, because again, it separates me from the bulk of people in grief. He did. I don't know how much time I got to get into this, but his double life jeopardized my life. It caused him to make me $30,000 in debt in 1985 dollars, which is about $79,000 today.
Yeah.
And I had just started my practice. I didn't have much of an income. We were behind on everything. I had to go through AIDS testing because of his behavior with a sex worker who was a drug addict. And that was like the equivalent of COVID today. They had no treatment for AIDS. And when I went in to get the testing, they were gloved up with a mask on and gloves, and it was humiliating. And then the result they had just come out with the Alicia blood test 2 weeks before I took it. And my doctor said, there's bound to be some false negatives and false positives because it's just new. So because of that, we want you to get tested every year for 7 years. So that weighed on me. My health really took a hit. So there was a lot of complications. And as a result, I was so angry with him for the lies and the willfully throwing away the life that we had, that set me apart from a lot of people who are in grief, who really miss the person and want them back. And I've met very few people who felt as I did, that I would not want to see him ever again. I don't grieve him. I don't wish him back. And that's a hard pill to swallow, that other people really, if you go into look at Hallmark greeting cards, you don't find one for that.
Right.
So that was a difference. So it set me apart, even from other fellow homicide survivors. I could say on the plus side, if there was one, it would be that it made it easier to grieve because I wasn't there just wishing he would come back. I'm like, I'm moving on with my life. You know, he got himself into this mess. He almost got me killed in the process for nothing, just because he wanted to do it. So I had a clean slate. I didn't have children at the time, and I just decided I had to start over. And that's what I did.
And that double life, you didn't find out until after he was murdered,
The
correct?
police
Yeah.
didn't tell me about it. At that time in Detroit's history, 1985, in July, they already had 750 murders to deal with. And by the time the year was out, it was close to 900 just in Wayne County alone. So it was like a assembly line, and they had no time to spend with me to sit me down and say, A led to B, and this is what happened to you and to your husband and what could have happened. They didn't have time for any of that. So when this one reporter that I mentioned wanted to write the book, my attorney came out. I wanted the book not published. I was totally against it. But my attorney brought me to my senses, and he goes, look, he said, if you want answers, this is the only opportunity you're going to get them. Because obviously your husband's not here to tell you. The police aren't going to tell you. You don't know who to even to ask. So if you want answers as to connect the dots, this is your chance. So I reluctantly cooperated with the book, and he was the one that started filling in the blanks for me about all the stuff that he'd been doing for at least 18 months behind my back.
So after they kind of sat you down, just that little brief 5-minute window there, what ended up, like, how did that double, like, it was truly this guy's just like writing a whole story, and like he was making a book, and that's how you found out about the double life part of
Right.
it? So I don't want to press for any detail on that, but was it because of like he found like actual evidence, or was this more of like, I don't want to, make fun of anybody or poke fun at anything, but some people embellish their stories. So that's where I was wanting to kind of
Yeah.
see, like, did it actually line up with things, or was it embellished a bit more just to kind
No.
of help clarify it?
I think it could have been much worse. I think he was a credible reporter. I think his ethics were in place, and he brought the evidence to me. He interviewed people in prison and their friends outside of prison, and he went into the neighborhood and talked to the neighbors, and he did his homework. So it's like between what he knew and what I knew, we began to knit it together, because my trail went cold and he could pick it up and say, well, when he told you that, here's an example. It was such a small thing, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. I had a new car, my first new car in my life. I was so tickled. And my husband said to me, I'm going to go get it detailed for you. And I go, it doesn't need detailing. It's clean. Well, I'm going to get it gassed up for you. I go, it has gas. It's fine. No, I really want to do this for you. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. Okay. So he took off in my new car. And when he came home a couple hours later, there was a crumpled up McDonald's bag in the back seat. And I'm thinking, well, he doesn't eat McDonald's. Detailers, if he went there, wouldn't have left that in the back. What the heck? And I don't remember what he said when I asked him about it. Well, what the reporter turned author told me was, yeah, he went and picked up John Fry that day because his car was stolen, and John Fry had arranged for his car to be stolen so that he could get him in a compromised position and get more money from him. And that was John Carl Fry's McDonald's bag in your backseat. So that's just one of many, many examples where I brought some of the information in, the reporter brought the other in, half of it, and we filled in the pieces together to make the whole picture.
Do you mind sharing what his double life was?
It's really hard to describe. I wrote a book on it ultimately, and there's a whole chapter
I
that
know.
is
Yeah.
devoted to this. But because it's not what people assume. In a nutshell, I think what happened was I outgrew him. When we first met, I was a high school graduate. He was 18 years older, and I was very impressed with his knowledge, with his education. But over time, I caught up with that. I got my master's, got my doctorate, and I got a postdoctoral fellowship, which he did not have. And I started questioning him, and he really did not like that. Like, I'd be saying things like, well, what about this particular drug for psychosis? Have you ever considered that as a reason for why this person is having side effects? And, well, that's got nothing to do with it. And he just really got offended. So I stopped talking cases with him and bringing him up to speed. And I think what happened was he needed to be appreciated and to have an audience. He needed to be Big Daddy. He needed people looking up to him. Well, there's no better place to find people to look up to you than to find people that are on the edge of homelessness with a severe drug habit. if you're supplying them with cash for drugs. So that was the exchange. It's like, I have a guaranteed audience now. They're going to come to me and I can resume my need to be needed. And he gave them everything that they wanted. He bought them cars, he rented apartments, he gave them all of our money, and things took a bad turn when he ran out of money. And they killed him for it.
Wow. Well, I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
Now,
But the
I
public
do
assumed it was a
have a bit of.
sexual thing, and it really wasn't. It was
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, even though he and Dawn had a sexual relationship, it was very short-lived. The bulk of the 18 months was like he was holding court and talking at them and them putting up with him and his monologues so that they could get his money, our money. So that was the real motivation behind it.
That's amazing. How heartbreaking for you. I'm sorry that you went through that.
It was hard enough without it being in the public
Yes.
eye, because everybody has an opinion and a theory and a need to gossip. And I don't think true crime fans take that into account when they're looking in on a crime as to the impact of the real people that it has. I mean, look at what happened at the morgue. They were waiting outside for me, and it was 7:30 in the morning on a Sunday, deliberately chosen so there wouldn't be people around. And I didn't get even out the door when Detective Landeros said, "Don't go any further, turn around." And she took me out the back door and had me lay down in her squad car. But it was just like you're feeling you're under siege and you're already vulnerable and exhausted. And the public does not have that right, but they behave as if they do. And it's the kind of situation, like it or not, where anybody can join our club at any time. And I've talked to reporters who used to be that way until they became a homicide survivor. And boy, did that change their opinion on how to conduct themselves.
So how would you tell people to conduct themselves in a situation like that? Would you say, be respectful, stay away, honor that there are people involved in this situation?
If they're a stranger to you, definitely stay away. I would also ask them not to guess as to what happened and come up with theories and treat it like it's a whodunit. It's a tragedy that they're not a part of, and just stay out of it. For people that know you casually, like coworkers, I would just say be kind and say something really brief like, "Sorry what happened to you. I'm here if you want to talk." Other than that, I'll let you lead it. But for people that know you really well, there's a whole boatload of stuff they can do. I wrote a second book. It's called What Now? Navigating the Aftermath of Homicide and Suicide. It's a reference book. And in there's a whole chapter on what friends can do to support somebody in this situation. We need them desperately, but we don't know what to ask at the time, and they don't know what to offer. But here's just one example of what they could do initially is to be a spokesperson between you and the media. You could say to them, read this statement and nothing else. Or you could say, answer questions if that's what you want them to do. That way you don't have to interface with them directly. That would be a wonderful service on the part of a friend, because you don't want to be out in public. You don't want to deal with the media most of the time. Now, if it's an unsolved homicide, that's a little different. Those people do need the media and do want attention.
Sure.
But that's one thing a friend can do, and a host of other things as well. And I think what friends can do then is to say to you things like, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to monitor your surroundings for safety, because you never know if all the perpetrators are caught. And many times they're not. They have, in the case of it going to trial, they have supporters, maybe other gang members. And you're worried about your own safety at that point. They can help you with that. Be on the lookout and make sure you're thinking straight. Like, have you locked your doors? Have you brought in your dog at night? Have you eaten today? Have you taken a shower in the last week? You're not thinking about any of that. It's the best way I can describe it is it's really not a series of days. It's like one long day. It's like there's no day, morning, noon, and night. It's one long day. And so you lose track of when is the last time I ate? When is the last time I slept? And they can be helpful that way, to at least until you have some professional helpers involved to make sure that you're getting the minimum of what you need. But I think the main thing in terms of what not to do is to not try to cheer you out of your grief. and to spend more time listening than talking.
The Set Me Free Project's mission is to stop human trafficking before it starts by providing prevention education to all ages, from kindergarten through adults and everybody in between.
That's a wonderful point. And that actually leads me into one of my questions that I had ready for you here, is because I think that's a lot of times what people try to do when somebody's going through grief is, well, let's just cheer them up, let's try to get them back into a good spirits and things like that when they're really not ready to do that. So I'm a little curious too of how would you describe the difference really between moving on and moving forward? Because people always try to imply that too, especially when they're trying to lighten you up and trying to get you in a better place. They're trying to get you to move on, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've moved forward from that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love your take on that.
One of the things I think people need to understand, I think this applies to trauma across the board, not just homicide, is that you hate to break people's bubbles, but there is no Hollywood ending. Once a big tragedy has occurred, you got to give that up. That's the stuff of movies. If it's an abduction, if it is a murder, if it is a rape, there's going to be an aftermath to that till you die. It comes out in odd ways sometimes, but I think that is something I would divest people from expecting, and therefore being cheered out of it is, in fact, what I really think, they're doing it for their own comfort. They don't know what to say, and they don't like being that raw, so they're wanting to cheer you up so things can kind of go back to normal, and that's just bogus. I think you are entitled to your grief. And the other thing is that we homicide survivors spend a lot of time ensuring other people are comfortable. We don't talk about the grisly, the nitty gritty, the real raw stuff. We don't. People don't want to hear it. And some of us don't want to be that vulnerable with them. So we save it for each other. There's a superficial layer that protects us from the general public. Maybe a good friend could handle it. But even then, there's been very few people outside of reading my book that would know about what happened at the morgue. I don't talk about that. As a matter of fact, to kind of give you perspective, many, many years later, 20 years later, I met a man that I eventually married, and he had to pull it out of me.
Wow.
I would tell him as I was married before, and he did not die a natural death. And he kept trying to say, well, there's more to it, isn't there? Yes, someday I'll go into it. I mean, eventually, I gave him a quick overview. And it really wasn't until my book came out and he read it that he fully got it. I just did not want to go there, even with somebody I was marrying. It's just such a life-altering, bizarre, painful, confusing experience that you don't expect other people to get it. And you don't want to be pitied. You don't want to be looked at as wounded, and you don't want advice. So you keep it under wraps a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So the Hollywood ending is for the movie theaters, but whether or not it's a rape or an abduction or a murder, it's going to stay with you. That's the definition of trauma. It's life altering, right down to the cellular level.
Yes.
That word is tossed around so casually today. There's songs out, there's articles out about the trauma of a breakup, of a dating relationship. That's not a trauma. It's upsetting, but it's not a trauma. Trauma means life altering, and it sticks with you at a very primitive level for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And it even alters brain function. That's been shown. And so that's a word I would caution people to use selectively and appropriately, not casually.
Yes. Yes.
I 100% agree. Now, I'm a little curious because you did touch on it that, good friends, maybe some close family, these are some good people that can be outlets or resources for somebody who's going through that process. I'm a little curious too, does that expand out to community, and what kind of role can community play in helping, and what makes somebody kind of feel truly supported out of the community standpoint too?
Wow. We don't have much community support, and I think that's because we withdraw, we get irritated, we get ungrateful, we get frightened for our safety, because if it happened once, it can happen again. So we pull away from society, and society pulls away from us. So we don't have a lot of community support. But I think it's necessary, and it would be lovely if we did have it. One of the things that would be great, for example, especially in bigger cities, it wouldn't be likely in a small town, but in a bigger city, to have a remembrance wall for everybody in that city or town that was killed through homicide. Some place where people can go and acknowledge it, kind of like what happened after 9/11. They had that
Right.
Yeah.
memorials set up. It can happen in small towns. I interviewed somebody on my podcast from Sharon, Pennsylvania, and her little 2-year-old niece was murdered.
Mm.
The police station was abhorred by what happened and actually put a plaque in the lobby of the police station in her honor. Well, that was really great of them. They didn't have to do that. So I think community remembering also October 25th as a day of remembrance for homicide survivors. That day goes by year after year with nobody paying any attention to it.
Right.
It would be, if I had my way, if I could be, czar for a day, I would expand our education system so that the community could support us in K-12 situations. We now have suicide prevention programs. Why not homicide prevention programs?
Mhm.
And talk about what to do if, or how to prevent, or what resources are out there. But the community, generally speaking, doesn't want to touch it.
Agreed.
Homicide is ugly, and politicians don't want to touch it unless they're thinking they're going to be votes for it, unless
Right.
it's perhaps touch their own life. They don't sponsor bills on our behalf. Realtors could help us by stopping these websites that are for sale that offer our addresses so that the true crime people can find us. There's a lot of things public can do, but it's a long day in coming. Marcy's Law is a great example. Marcy's Law came about after Marilee was murdered, and it gives rights to crime victims, and it's only been adopted in 13 states. The rest have not adopted it, but it gives us basic rights, such as things like you have the right to be notified if the person believed to be responsible for the homicide has escaped prison or jail, that you will be notified of that. Only 13 states is that a guaranteed right. And that's how the law came about, because after Marcelie was murdered, her mother was on the way home from her funeral, her daughter's funeral, and stopped at a store to buy bread. And the person accused, the boyfriend, who was later convicted of murdering her, was in the store and came up to her with a smirk. He'd only been held 24 hours and nobody notified her that he'd been released. That's not right. So I would urge one big way is to get going for Marcy's Law in the states that have not adopted it. And the ACLU is one of the proponents to not pass it. They
I
do
w
not like Marcy's Law. So
I
I
was
stopped
gonna
my
ask you.
membership with the ACLU.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that because, they were working on Marcy's Law in a state near me, and there were a lot of social service organizations that were opposed to Marcy's Law. Can you share a little bit about what it is that people are opposed to when it comes to Marcy's Law?
The basic concern is it will remove, you have a right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And they are concerned that if you give crime victims rights, that right to be presumed innocent will be taken away. So for example, one of the rights of Marcy's Law is that if you go to the hearings, you get preferential seating. You get to be in a place of safety in the courtroom so that you can't, like, say if it's a gang murder, you're not going to be put in a place in the courtroom where the gang members are sitting behind you, that you're going to have preferential seating. Well, ACLU is concerned that if you get preferential seating, it makes it look like the defendant is guilty.
I see.
So that's their concern,
Yeah.
is it removes the right of presumed innocence.
Well, I do think also that we have in our society this fascination with, as you mentioned, true crime fans. So we have a fascination with the murderers, and we actually do forget about the families, and we forget about the victims of the murderers. And I do think that is, we have a scholarship for a young gal, Sydney Loof, who was murdered by an incredibly horrible couple. And the one thing that we've seen through this is that when we created a scholarship in Sydney's name to really have her legacy be a legacy of safety and a legacy of protection and the amazing woman that she was, instead of the names of the people who committed the crime. And that's all we hear about. That's the sensationalism of it. And I think people are forgotten along the way. And we forget that there are real people attached to the
Well, like it
perpetrator.
or not, I don't think we will ever be as interesting as the homicide. I don't think there will
Hmm.
ever be the interest in the people afterwards.
Right.
When I set out to do my podcast, true crime podcast is the number one genre out there.
Yes.
And there wasn't one about homicide survivors by a homicide survivor until I had my own podcast.
Oh,
So
wow.
one against, I don't know, 200, 300 different podcasts
Right.
out there. I don't think we'll ever be as interesting. And we're not the who done it. We don't have that
Right.
angle. And not only that, I think it's too frightening. I think people look at it as a mystery to be solved when they're on their couch eating popcorn looking at a movie. And there's not that angle if you're getting into the lives of the aftermath. And that Hollywood ending thing kicks in. I don't think the public wants to know that 20 years, 30 years later, now that they're being let out on parole, the people who've been
Hmm.
tried and convicted, and you're again in fear for your safety, they don't
Hmm.
want to hear about that. They want to
Hmm.
believe that, all is well that ends well, and you got put behind bars, and that's the end of the story. And, and you can move on now. And it's just not that way. They don't make room for that. And, the reality of it is more upsetting, I think, than people are wanting to deal with.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think people love the fantasy aspect of murder mystery nuance, and they completely remove the human aspect, even though they tell them right away these are based on true events, these are based on real people. Immediately, there's almost a dissociation of just, all right, it's not a person, it's a video that I'm watching, or it's just a thing I'm listening to or reading.
Right.
And I think when they, or, I'm hoping it's a when they find your podcast and they start to kind of open their eyes a little bit more to survivor centered opinions and kind of views on things that happen directly to these, murder mysteries, so to speak. I think that's where people will kind of lose that interest, and in a good way, in that, because we need to lose that almost romanticism about these murder
Mhm.
mysteries, and we need to make it a reality of these are real
Yes, I
people.
agree with you.
Yeah, and
If you look
how
at
would we do that?
Etsy, they sell products which are so offensive to murder,
Hmm.
about murder. Like they have killer spoons, serial killer spoons, SERIAL spoons.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. There's a lot
I've
of
never.
merchandise on Etsy related to homicide. They even have cruises now, of murder mystery cruises. And I'm like, this isn't fun. This isn't entertainment. And I think people look at it as a mystery. I wish people instead would look at it as, what's the fallout from this? And what are the implications for me or my loved ones or my close relatives? Now, homicide is a rare event. I do want to add that. It's not like true crime would have you believe. Your chances literally are greater of dying falling out of bed than being killed by a serial murderer. That's how rare it is. And it's getting rarer because of CCTV footage. Suicide is not so much. That's a more common event. But homicide is pretty rare and it's going down. We are living at the safest time in history in the United States when it comes to homicide. But you won't get that out of the news. You don't get that out of true crime podcasts. We're down to about 20,000 murders per year on average in the United States today. And back in the 1900s, it was 3 times, 4 times that. It's gone down, down, down. And on the other hand, the negative part of it is, this surprises a lot of people, the solving of homicides has also gone down. We're only at a flip of the coin at this point. Used to be a 70% chance of solving a homicide. And even though today with advanced technology, it is
Yeah.
down now to about a 50-50 chance whether or not the perpetrator will be caught. So there's a very good chance of the murder going unsolved, which is a whole nother layer of complications.
Yes,
I was
that's
gonna say, I feel
shocking.
like that's like a whole episode itself of like,
Yeah.
how has police work evolved and how many of these cases from back in the day were actually founded on evidence, or it was a detective's theory who he could make sense of everything and made it fit. I'm a little curious on if that has a large percentage of why that leveled back out.
Well,
Yeah.
some of the most prevalent reasons for why homicide solving has decreased is because there's fewer police to do the work. We have a high turnover rate in the police, law enforcement in
Mhm.
general, detectives as well. And new people coming on are not going to be as dedicated to the case as those that work the
Right.
case themselves. We also have more murders because of gangs, and those gang members are going to threaten people from testifying or producing any evidence, and they're very convincing when they do that. We also have more murders that occur between strangers than we did prior to 1970. Just maybe because it's an initiation rite or it's an armed robbery situation, but there's more stranger upon stranger homicides. That makes it harder to solve because you don't have a good motive. And the other one is there's more knowledge out there about how to get away with homicides, like killing somebody outdoors. And so because the evidence quickly fades, that makes it harder to solve. So there is a lot of reasons behind it, and it's really disconcerting to know that in spite of the MVAC and other advances in technology, that you can't count on it as a for sure thing.
As both a psychologist and a survivor, how has your understanding of resilience changed over the years?
That's a good question. I'm more optimistic about it than I've ever been. I say that based on largely upon the people I've met through my podcast. Every one of them was a success story. Now, granted, I'm not talking with 100% of the homicide survivors out there, but for the people that I met, every homicide was unique. They were all terrible. I came away just impressed with them. And I'm thinking, if this thing called resilience is real, they did it against the odds. I can just give you one example here. There's many examples come to my mind, but here's one. I interviewed a young woman, Shelley Edwards Jorgensen, who was 16 years of age when her father made good on his promise to murder her mother and burn down the house, which he did. He had influence, he had money. And for that reason, it took them a long time to finally pin him to the murder. In that interim, she was living with him. She was 16 years of age. He hadn't been charged with a murder. She knew he killed her, but she was living under the same roof with him. Finally, the prosecution caught up, charged him with the murder, and he was not held behind bars. He was allowed to be free on his own recognizance during the trial, which is very rare. And she was still living under the same roof with him while he's going to court. Then the prosecuting attorney says to Shelley, when she's 17 years of age, I want you to testify against your father. She did, knowing she had to go home and be under the same roof with him. All of her relatives took advantage of the situation, so she ended up financially with nothing when he got convicted. She was so strapped for money when she became a college student that she would sneak into the college cafeteria and eat crackers to survive. She got her degree in engineering, and she's an engineer today. She's written a wonderful book called Beautiful Ashes. And if you were to meet her on the street, you would never get a clue what her history was. You talk about resilience. She was a kid when this happened with no support, none. Her mother was gone. Her dad was the killer. Her sister took off and didn't even participate in any of it. She was much older. Her friends tried, but how much other 16, 17-year-olds were prepared for that? And neighbors were like, I'm not getting into this. The guy's a killer. So she was on her own and she did it. So my view of resilience is it's doable. It is absolutely doable. That doesn't mean it's automatic. Certain things have to take place, but I believe that people have far more capacity for resilience than they appreciate. You don't know what you're capable of until you're pressed to your limit. You really don't. And a lot of people surprise you.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
I love that.
In fact, one of my favorite sayings is that, I hope I get this right, there's a lot of suffering in the world. There's equally a lot of the overcoming of it. And I think that's true. We don't hear about those people, but they're there. I've spoken to them. That's why we have this concept called post-traumatic growth. We don't talk about it enough. We talk a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a term I don't like because it implies that you're deranged. I wish we would use the term post-trauma injury, but we don't. Post-traumatic growth means that the trauma happens and it's awful. It brings you to your knees, but in the long run, you come out stronger. You come out more self-assured. You come out with an appreciation for things that you do not take for granted, like locks on your doors and ring doorbells and your ability to be sensitive to strange behavior in other people. You pick up on that now that you're so hypervigilant, that your ability to speak out about it, to testify in court against it, to influence laws about it. There's so many strong people out there whose names we'll never know that are there. And I wish we'd make movies about them.
Agreed. I agree. Wow. Amazing.
I think a basic ingredient to resilience is connection. If people could connect with other people who've been through what they've been through, whether it's rape, kidnapping, homicide, it really is a booster of your understanding, self-confidence, and optimism. You don't try to do it alone. That's why podcasts are so important. That's why conferences are so important. I'm putting on
Yes.
with a colleague of mine a first ever National Homicide Survivor Conference this fall in
Oh,
Gig
that's
Harbor,
amazing.
Washington. There's never been one. And I'm thinking it's about time. I got the idea when I attended a conference for the wrongfully convicted of murder.
Mm.
And I thought if they can do it, through the Innocence Project, I thought if they can do it, why can't we do it?
Good for
So
you.
fingers crossed. I hope we have we're limiting our attendance to 70 people. And it's going to be on 9/11 this fall. And I chose
Wow.
that date of 9/11 because for those people old enough to remember the terrorist attacks firsthand from watching
Yeah.
them on TV or living in New York or Pennsylvania, we were all homicide survivors for that first few minutes. If you
Yeah.
recall how you felt the first 5 minutes of your awareness of those terrorist attacks, before you got the thing spelled out for you, the fear, the confusion, the disbelief, the sheer panic that can set in, the horror, the anger that you felt. That's what homicide survivors go through. And
Yeah.
that's why I chose that date. But I'm hoping that I get a good turnout for this because I think it'll have a ripple effect. If people come to this conference, they can improve their functioning, which means if they're a parent, their children will benefit. If
Yep.
they have an employer, their employer will benefit. If they have friendships, the friendships will benefit from it. So, and I think it'll be a wonderful experience. I'm looking at it as kind of a homecoming.
Wow. That is beautiful. I think on that note, where can we find out more about that, more about you, more about your book?
It's all in one place, so it's pretty simple. Just go to my website. It's all lowercase and it's JanCantyPhD.com. JanCantyPhD.com. There's information in there on the conference. There's my books. There's the link to my podcast. And by the way, I keep a very active blog on there. I looked yesterday, it's up to 222 articles on a variety of topics, some of which are related to victims of any stripe, whether that's, like, for example, I have a blog article on the importance of sleep. And that applies to anybody who's been in a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
Sleep is number one. And it's robbed of you early and chronically. And if you don't get good sleep, nothing else matters.
So true.
So I keep that active blog and people are welcome to look at that as well.
Yeah, we'll
I
put
do
that
too. And
information in the link. Go
poof,
ahead.
it's right down
Yes.
there. All you got to do is scroll down a little bit and it's right there.
Yes, we will provide that for all of you. Wow. Dylan, anything else?
My last question for you, and I think we'll put a nice big bow on today's episode. Again, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing not only your experiences, but some of your growth and wisdom that you've had to not only develop, but just kind of figure out for yourself. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing some of that with us. My last question for today, for anybody who's out there listening, watching, or just tuning in for today's episode, who maybe feels defined by some trauma or maybe some sort of loss in their life, what would you want them to know about their capacity to build a meaningful life beyond what's happened to them?
It is very likely because it isn't the trauma by itself that is so injurious as it is our reaction to it. I base that on for example, on some of the writings by people that were in the Holocaust. They came out of the Holocaust and the concentration camps where everything was taken from them, everything, their relatives, their health, their freedom. And there is a concept through logotherapy in which it talks about it's how you define it. When I was going through it, I thought, I'll be damned if I'm going to be collateral damage. That is not in my bailiwick. They've taken my husband, my finances, my sleep, my privacy. That's all they get. End of story. From here on out, it's about me and building my life back. I am not going to be a victim. I just was not open to that. And I think if people understood that they have some more control over the outcome by looking at how they define themselves and how they define their futures, connecting with other people, that does not have to define them. It does not. It's an important chapter in their life, definitely. It will stay with them indefinitely. But it is not the end of the story. It is not. It is a very difficult chapter, a big hurdle that they have to climb. But with time and proper support and finding other people who've been through it and who are further along the path than you are, it is entirely possible to put it in perspective as the years go by, and it will find its natural place. It is, I really do get concerned when people think it has to be their identity from them out. I mean, there's neighbors where I live right now who have no idea this has happened to me. I don't put it on my forehead and talk about it. I don't. It's just, unless I have to talk about it or choose to talk about it, I don't. It happened. It was awful. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. It took a toll on me, but here I am, happily married, adopted 2 kids. I'm living a good life. I'm
Amazing.
traveling. I'm doing my photography. I'm a master gardener now. I have a lot of other things going in my life besides that. And
That's great.
other people will find that is the case too. And it begins with hope. It begins with the belief that they can rise above this, grow around it, and put it in its proper perspective over time.
That's
I
amazing.
appreciate that.
That is good. Jan, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story and just your wisdom. I think that is so important. And I think this gives some of that education that we all need so desperately. I think you put such an important perspective on something that people don't want to think about or choose not to think about. And you have done it
No,
with such
and to be
grace.
fair, I didn't either. I was one of
Right.
them at one point. I get it.
Sure.
I'm not blaming them. I was the same
No.
way before it happened to me. But
Right.
there's nothing like experience to teach you.
Yes, and if we can learn from you instead of going through it ourselves, that would be the ideal thing. But you do it with such grace. So thank you so
Well,
much. I
thank you, Stephanie.
appreciate
I
it.
appreciate it.
And
Yeah.
best of luck on your upcoming September 11th event.
Yes.
I'm
Keep the
excited.
best
I'm
turnout.
jazzed about it.
That
really
is so exciting. Well, please keep us in the loop. We would love to promote it and share it
Thank
with
you.
people.
Thank you.
I think that would be wonderful. So thank you so much for your time. This was a great podcast to come back to. I appreciate
Yeah.
it, Jan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate it.
Thank
Of
you.
course. Thank
And
you, Jan.
hey, we thank you for joining us and get some R&R. We'll see you next time.